2024, year 9 of Eternal Durdles.
Next on Eternal Durdles. Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Durdle Maniacs. If you want to be a Durdle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show.
Oh, I shouldn't say the name, should I?
No, it's great. It's actually, that's perfect. All right.
I don't know what else I'd say. Year 9 of this podcast.
Yeah, no, it's great. Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Bleckman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, are we boomers now?
I think we are officially Magic Boomers. If you've been playing this game for, I think, over half a decade, you're considered a Magic Boomer. So yeah, no, year 9, we're rolling into 2024 with year 9 of this podcast. I think we started in like March or something like that. So it's not our official start of year 9, but I like to just cut it off at the year and make it so that, everything evens out. Nice and simple that way.
Nice and simple. What do you look forward to?
Man, I don't know. I mean, we had such a strong year. This was easily the podcast's strongest year. What do we look forward to? I think playing more physical Legacy, getting out there and playing, possibly, even putting up some numbers, maybe hit a top 8 or 2.
Maybe we launch EternalDurdles.com.
Maybe we launch EternalDurdles.com. I think actually it already exists. We've already bought it. You can visit EternalDurdles.com. It has nothing on it right now.
That's why I say launch. We can own it. I mean, launch it.
Yeah.
And then you can get all of your Legacy hullabaloo on there.
Yeah, maybe we'll try and centralize where you find all the Legacy content in
maybe we'll do that
area. Yeah, so I think one of the cool things we can do is, because we've been using Spotify for podcasters for like a little over a year, maybe 2 years or something like that, we have stats. We have like stats to share, which is, I don't know, I find that stuff fascinating. So what some of these stats are, we gained 52% in listeners, 95% streams. I don't know what that even means. Plus 95% streams, plus 41% followers. I thought that was the same as listeners. And we have, this is the best part, plus 277% minutes created. That means we have produced almost 3 times the content that we did, almost 4 times the content, because 100% would be 2 times the content, right?
Yeah,
so almost 4 times the content.
Spotify told us that we posted 127 video episodes, which it's not audio episodes. So, ever since moving over to video and then putting it onto Spotify, where, because we do video and audio because people like to listen differently, that's why when you go onto Spotify, it literally floods your whole thing with like 3 different versions of us. And we know about that, and we also don't like it. And Spotify won't let us do anything different. They also won't let us have a toggle so you can like turn it off or whatever. It just exists there.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate because we want to be able to have everybody who wants to enjoy the show however they like to enjoy it how they like. So we leave it as is, but we have heard that feedback. And we also are amongst that feedback. And we're hoping that in 2024, Spotify also gives us the option to allow our listeners to toggle what they like to have come into their feed. That way it doesn't just like sit there if you never listen to it.
Yeah. I guess we should also just thank all of our supporters to begin with. Everybody that's joined us on Patreon over the last few months. We had a downtick in Patreon as the pandemic happened. I think a lot of people decided that, they had to put their money in other places and whatnot. And to see people start to come back, we've got a couple people that reinstated their lapsed patrons and stuff like that. And, like I said, it's a small community. So it's great to see some of those folks back. And obviously all the support is much appreciated because we do use it to try and make the podcast better, which I think we can all agree that we have
better
been
quality,
doing. Yeah.
Worse opinions. Am I right?
Yeah. The same decks, better quality.
We look sharper on screen, but our takes are just as bad.
Yeah. Maybe next year we'll get Phil a Pac-Man suit.
Yo, I need to get I get a Donkey Kong suit.
Like Galaga, I think. Do the arcade
too,
smash up. So what were some other stats we got here? So the number of minutes created was 10.4K created. United States was our top country, which is no surprise. You know what our second country was, Phil?
Sweden.
Germany.
I knew it was going to be somewhere in Europe.
And then I think UK is after that. And then it's either Sweden or Netherlands is after that.
The legacy scene over in Europe, man. They love the content. They support the content all over.
Yeah. We have I don't know what this means, but we have 37 top podcast fans.
That means that there are 37 people who listen out there, that we are amongst their most listened podcasts.
Okay. So then we are the top 5 of 250. Oh, we are the top podcast. We are the number 1 podcast for 37 people. Then we're the top 5 for 257 people, and the top 10 for 417 people, which honestly, Phil, I think our subscriber base on through podcasts is about the same as our top 10, which is pretty wild.
I want to apologize for all of the ways that I've steered all of you wrong.
Yeah. I regret nothing. So that's I just want to have this quick little episode to talk about our stats and to thank everyone for listening and stuff, and to kind of give ourselves a touchstone so that we can look back on this next year and see where we were. So let's look at I think YouTube wise, let's pull that up just so that we can have this moment in time here. YouTube has us at drum roll 1,285 subscribers. So that's awesome.
All right, so for this episode next year, what's the target?
This let's say another 1,000. I think another 1,000 is a completely doable number. So let's go with 2,000.
2,285. All right, I'm into it. Zac, can we chat Legacy for a little bit?
We should.
How do you feel Legacy stands after a year of it in 2023?
I don't think Legacy's been this good for several years.
Where did you think that the movement happened?
I think the movement happened after Lord of the Rings. I think reintroducing black as a playable color in fair decks was a big up for the format. Even though maybe Bowmasters is not the most fun or healthy thing to be doing in the format, it certainly allowed fair black decks to start playing Magic again. Even if that was just a black splash for a Grixis Delver deck, or throw it as a splash in Death and Taxes. I think that Orcish Bowmasters allowed people to start thinking again about playing black cards, which for the most part they weren't for the last 2 years. I want to say 2-3 years. So that to me signals, being able to play all 5 colors again signals a marked increase in the viability of a lot of different decks.
For both cards and or decks / archetypes, what do you think were the biggest gainers and losers of 2023?
Well, I think, losers. It's hard to say losers because there's always going to be that one deck that just falls off the face of the planet, and so I guess 100% inviability you're going to be the biggest loser. But I think that Delver decks as a whole took a big hit this year. People were able to play fairer decks. Tempo as a whole kind of dropped down a little bit. Is it still very good? Yeah, it's still very good. But I think Tempo is less viable today than it was today last year.
I'm gonna check you a little bit here on what, because I think that let's do the first quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see where we stood in the first quarter. All right. Well, that's figuring itself out. You think so? So you think Tempo was one of the biggest drops?
I think Tempo overall was probably one of the biggest losers as far as deck representation to win percentage, let's say.
Zac, I think you and I lived in different 2023s, my guy.
Unfortunately, we very much did. I was playing 8-cast the entire time.
You played 8-cast the entire. I want to just signal back to how recent it actually was, even though it may have felt like it was a little while ago. Initiative was this year.
Yes.
So when it was the top 2 decks in the metagame in Initiative era was Blue-Red Delver with Expressive Iteration and Initiative.
Yep.
And then when both were gone, there was like a short heyday where people were like figuring themselves out. Then Lord of the Rings came in, and then Delver was right back on top again.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't think Delver dropped from the number 1 played deck at all, but I think that it lost percentage points.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. I don't have those numbers, but that would make more sense.
I think it's percent played to dropped as well as its win ratio dropped. I think people are able to play more than just Blue-Red Delver now, more than just Blue-Red/X Delver right now. I think the metagame opened up a bit because Days got worse, basically. I think the big loser this year was Days, and I still think we should ban that card anyhow.
What do you think were the biggest gainers then?
Biggest gainers? That's tough, man. I think the white, like the Boros Initiative deck is probably one of the biggest gainers. Honestly, I mean, there's a bit of bias here, but I think, speaking a little early, I think Infect is one of the bigger gainers. But again, that's one of those things where it's like, it was at 0%, and now it's at 1%, which is a gigantic percentage increase, you know? But it's wild to think that a deck, that deck is now playable in an era where when we looked at, you know, like the Renin 6 era where people were like, this deck isn't viable anymore, or even Orcish Bowmasters becoming a thing. And I always said the same thing. You can discount Infect, but if you're just playing sorcery speed or 2 mana answers to creatures, the deck knows how to deal with that stuff.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Yeah, I think Legolas's Quick Reflexes is still a card that's still room to be explored. Clearly it has done work in Infect for the people who are strong at piloting that list, recognize that it's very good. Excuse me. It posted a good result, not Infect, but Legolas's Quick Reflexes did post a top 32 at EW in Selesnya Depths, which is pretty good.
It also got 19th place with Infect.
Got 19th place with Infect, yep. So that there's still space to be had there, where I think, you know, it's possible that it shows up as well in Credo Control at some point, because doing shenanigans with your Dryad Arbor of tapping and untapping, so just like Machine Gun a board, is pretty good. I imagine that there's some other space that hasn't been explored about that, of just like the tap-on-tap style effects, just being able to Plague Wind an opponent.
Yeah, I mean, the word whenever on a Magic card is always like, you got to look at it a couple times, you know? Whenever this creature becomes tapped, it deals damage to it equal to its power to some other creature. Like, yeah, of course. Like,
yeah, I want to throw back to a little bit, if we can remember correctly, how our 2023 went down. That Expressive Iteration early on was the pseudo. Everybody was like, "This is too much. It's too much. It's just too much." And then Initiative came in, and we had a 2-deck format. However, during that time, similar to previous times where there's been clearly tier 0 decks, there's typically the one outlier that is not in tier 0 that just happens to be quite good against the strat that is at the top, and therefore is also in the top decks. So one of my favorite examples of this is when Ragavan was in the format, and that meant that D&T was a lot better.
Yeah.
And so D&T was arguably one of the best decks during the Ragavan era, even though I don't think you would call it a tier 1 deck. I think it became one of the best performing decks because it was so good at exactly beating up on a 2-1 that didn't have any good flips off of the top of the opponent's deck. But you had to play Ragavan if you wanted to keep up with the actual tier decks in the format. And so Death and Taxes sort of like snuck in as like a very powerful thing. It was a very similar space when Renin 6 was in the Delver list, and, you know, people were just getting stripped out. And if the game progressed even, you know, any amount of time. And so that was the tier 0 deck. And it just so happened that the one thing that Renin 6 was bad against was Storm. And so Storm was,
Yeah.
even though I wouldn't have called it like tier 0, it was the best deck, and it won that GP in the hands of Cyrus Corman Go.
So you're saying all that to say what is now the best deck in regards to that situation?
In the front half of 2023, you had Expressive Iteration Delver and Mono White Initiative as the best decks. And you know what was very good against Mono White Initiative? Cephalid Breakfast.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, Cephalid Breakfast.
So Breakfast was crushing during that era. It was a fine deck on its own, but it was so good against exactly the decks that were trying to be like, okay, I have a sorcery speed card advantage spell, whatever, kill you. Mm-hmm. Or I have this, I'm going to put this, untouchable, uninteractable thing into play. Well, I happen to be a creature combat, a creature combo deck that can kill you out of nowhere if you're not prepared for it, or can take the initiative and protect it fairly well, and the second that you take it back, kill you.
Yeah.
So it had very good matchups against the top 2 decks and was one of the best decks, even though I don't think anybody would have been like if you went into that, if you look 6 months ago and we're like, what were the best decks? You'd be like, well, it's clearly Delver with EI and clearly Mono White Initiative, and it's not close.
Yeah.
And then beneath that, you have Cephalid Breakfast, which is good against those things. And then you had like the Uro Minsk and Boo piles. Speaking of which, Minsk and Boo, nowhere to be found. Uro, sort of fallen off those decks a little bit.
We were calling for bans on Uro, like not more than a year ago. It's wild.
I want to just put the caveat in there. My stance is just because the card doesn't see play doesn't mean that it should get the pass on looking. There are a bunch of cards that I think are that make the format net worse, and I think Uro is one of them. Even though Uro is seeing less play, I don't think that's the fault of Uro isn't as powerful. I think the bottlenecks on the format are so condensed at the moment that Uro is pushed out of the format the way that Uro pushed a bunch of other things out of the format when it wasn't bottlenecked out of the format. So just because it's not the most powerful thing now doesn't mean that it suddenly, maybe it was healthier than we thought. It was never healthy.
I will go a step further than that and say just because it's been power crept out doesn't mean it's good design now.
That's what I'm saying. I agree.
Yeah.
And so similarly, I don't think I think Minsk and Boo and Initiative are sort of in the similar space where it's they were designed to fight in a format across 4 players with 120 life. Yeah. And if you just think mathematically on how that works, okay, there are 3 additional players and 5 times the amount of life in the game. So just how much more aggressive those cards need to be pushed in order to compete in that format to come down into 1v1. So, the same way, I don't think Minsk and Boo is good for the format, but, so likewise. But all that is to say, I also want to pour one out for Staff of the Storyteller.
Yeah.
Short-lived, super short-lived. And,
All-star for just a moment. Yeah.
People were trying to make that world work. And we were so close, but such is the way of the world with a card that actually has a mana gate.
Yep.
Because now we have up the Beanstalk.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
if I were to say 2023 was the year of, I would say it would be the year of the Beanstalk.
I think Beanstalk is insane, but I think too that means that, okay, yes, Beanstalk is one of the bigger gainers, which means that Leyline Binding is a bigger gainer, and particularly Murktide Regent is the bigger gainer, and there's a couple of other cards in that space. But I also think that one of the biggest gainers because of all this is specifically Painter decks. And when I say, excuse me, Painter decks and Boros Initiative, I think are both 2 extremely strong decks because incidentally, those are decks that are happy to play Blood Moon effects. And Blood Moon effects happen to be something that is very good against the best decks in the format, which I think are Days Wasteland, Murktide Regent, and Leyline Binding, Beanstalk, Murktide Regent.
Yeah.
I think that those shells are the 2 best shells in the format, and both of those shells do kind of poorly against Magus of the Moon and its ilk. But the thing is that both of those decks do not allow each other to not be forced into the space where Blood Moon is bad against them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because if you want to play Beanstalk, you got to have the shitty mana base to support Leyline Binding, which means you got to walk into Blood Moon effects. And then for Delver, in order to like keep pace with each other in the race of like, we have to be streamlined because you can't miss a beat, because the second you do, a Murktide comes down and a Murktide one-shots you. So you have to also be as fluid as possible there, and then you get chucked by Blood Moon effects. So they sort of compel each other to like stay in the lane of being soft to Blood Moon.
Yeah.
And then on the side of those two decks, I think the other biggest gainer continually and forever will always be Urza Saga. Urza Saga at the beginning of the year, my guy. That was you.
Yeah,
I was on it. You were crushing.
I was on it. Man. I was doing really good. Whenever I played in a side event, side event and boss t-shirts.
He's got to bring this up every time. Every time we talk about side events, he's got to be like,
crushed in side events. I just did not do great in main events.
He's always got to talk about how he beat me in the finals, everybody. Yeah. He'll never let me forget it. We were fighting for the top prize. I said, man, no splits.
All you have to do is beat me in the finals of another side event.
I said, no splits, because splitting is quitting, and then he crushed me.
And then we took those spoils and we gave them to the viewers.
We gave them back to the viewers, and we gave them back to the viewers for like 8 months.
Yeah, it was like I still have like 2 or 3 of those cards. I gotta like figure out what to do with them. You know what? We're giving them out on this episode.
Wow.
Comment below. Give me my stuff. And
comment below on what you think was the biggest winner and biggest loser, whether it's card, archetype, deck, whatever that is. Because I think like things move so fast now that like these were just the cards and decks that like I recall being insane, but I was also looking at they were insane through like my lens as a Bad Miracles pro. Yeah. Like there might be things that I'm totally forgetting about in the world of like, you know, you and all of the other Urza Saga players that are just like, yeah, before we were just nobody gave a shit about Patchwork Automaton, and then we started playing Patchwork, and that was great. And now Patchwork is too slow because it doesn't do anything because you just get comboed or whatever. Yeah. You know?
It's funny when you look at the arc of Urza Saga this year, where we started off with 8 cast being a pretty strong deck, and then we go into you get to SCG Baltimore and Tony Scaponi's Black Saga Storm is the thing, and then and Patchwork gets pretty heavy, and we're seeing people make a more stompy style 8 cast deck, and then people just are like, you know what, I've had it. We're gonna play 3 Meltdowns. I'm splashing for Meltdown, and the deck is, I would say right now, is at its all-time lowest. I don't even think it's on the Goldfish like top 10 at this point. Which means that people are going to start skewing. People are going to start skewing their Meltdowns. It might be time to pick that up again, guys.
I would argue at this point that the decks in Legacy are so powerful in terms of like the shells around them, and so redundant that there's way fewer times where the deck just like gives you a moment to breathe. If I would say anything, it feels as though Legacy is a little bit more asthmatic in that there isn't any breath. The game starts, and then you can't stumble. No, you cannot stumble at all. Which I think is why you start seeing things like 3 Meltdown plus for like any decks where if you have a Haymaker, you play way more of them. I remember we talked about this a couple of episodes ago where we were like, how close is Legacy to just getting to the same process of how you have to sideboard similar to Vintage, where like you just have to have these gigantic Haymakers that, and a lot of them in your sideboard, and just essentially like, craft out your cards as many as you can to be like, okay, this is for artifacts, okay, this is for whatever, and you need the hard thing, because if you don't find it, you still die. The same way that it's like if you don't have enough graveyard hate against Bazaar and Vintage, you just die to it, even if it's in your deck, because you need to have enough of it, and you need to have a density of it in order to get through permission.
Yeah, we're gonna see sideboards that are like 4 ley line, 4 choke, like stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's our trajectory.
You know who I think the biggest loser was this year, Phil? In truth,
me.
Well, you could put an argument up there to that you didn't have a great year, but I think the budget player had their worst year. Because we started out thinking, hey, Death Shadow's back. We got Orcish Bowmasters, right? But what the truth was, Phil, is that people just played Scam instead. people were like, no, I'll just jam another $3,000 worth of dual lands into my deck, and I'll play the better version of Death Shadow, right? So you couldn't find those budget decks, and because right now, like I was saying before, honestly, I think fair Ancient Tomb decks that aren't initiative are probably at their worst right now. It's just a bad year for budget players, and I think it's going to be interesting when we do our budget episode at the beginning of the year, what we decide to look at for budget options, because like, you know, in previous years we've leaned on 8-cast, we've leaned on Death Shadow because their mana bases are at least reasonable. You know, and we've looked at decks like Show and Tell and stuff like that don't need the dual lands, but I think, you know, the more we talk about it, the more I think that the budget player gets left behind in this format. Thankfully, people like Buffalo Chicken Dip, my local Dark Depths Games, several other places are proxy friendly, and I think, you know, as players, we need to support those stores that are doing proxy friendly Legacy for sure. But you know, eventually, when you want to play in a big event, you know, you need the real thing. So again, shout out to people who lend cards. You know, that's a huge factor. It was the reason why I could play Infect this year at Eternal Weekend.
Yeah, I think that the land cyclers like Troll and so like, you know, I think Reanimate was a huge gainer in the format just because it opened up, like, I mean, obviously like Black became ubiquitous because Bowmasters has no downside to it whatsoever, and the Troll made it so that Reanimate was just like a real easy, you know, 3-turn clock on turn 1 of the game or whatever. But yeah, I think like, you know, what were the 2 top budget decks going into at the beginning of the year were 8-cast, which is still totally reasonable. Yeah. I mean, you have to be over prepared for hate, but it's still totally reasonable to play because, you know, you put 12 power into play on turn 3 on the play with
it's just
a
not
full
the
grip plus a tutor.
Top 3 deck that it was at the beginning of the year.
Well, yeah, I mean, Bowmasters also is going to be punishing against it. Also, players recognize that like they needed to have direct and, you know, respectable answers to it. So you saw you just saw the deck being respected.
Yeah.
And then the moves that 8-cast seemed to make did not necessarily pivot away from solving what was boarded in against them. So, you know, moving towards like, you know, Kappa Cannoneer and being a little bit more like a stompy beatdown, like that was not conducive to still being able to beat a meltdown.
Yeah.
You know, like, so like there wasn't a real pivot there. You know, I don't know if it wasn't explored because there was just other new things and interesting tools to do. I mean, the One Ring, you know, Ancient Tomb PO deck, you know, is around. I mean, in the Commander era that we live in of cards, the biggest gainers every year, we haven't quite talked about it yet, but the biggest gainers every year, I think, are always going to continue to be Urza Saga, and by extension, Ancient Tomb, and by extension, Chrome Mox.
Yeah.
I think Chrome Mox has over the last year, between getting Beseech the Mirror for Storm combo and for all of the other combo decks that play Beseech, and the initiative decks, whether it's Ancient Tomb decks, whether it's initiative, whether it's the addition of Chrome Mox in Goblins, like Chrome Mox is the additional branch amongst the Ancient Tomb Stompy-esque whatevers, and the more and more power that we get from the Commander products of single pit 3-drops, the better Ancient Tomb is going to get, and therefore the better Chrome Mox gets alongside of it. So, you know, if Ancient Tomb is Gaston, Chrome Mox is LeFou.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah.
I want to watch this space for a second. So we lost a lot of designers for Magic in the last month, you know, in the last couple of days even. I think WotC had to liquidate 1,100 workers. A lot of those were probably high level. Yeah, I mean, that is complete bullshit. And
of course,
Chris
it's
Cox should just get out of here. What are you doing? That's ridiculous. But you know, reality being what it is, and you know, those people are gone now. They're looking for new jobs. I wonder if when we get to a time when the cards have not been designed by that swath of people who came in, and I'm not saying card design is amazing right now. It's middling at best. But I wonder if it drops even more and we see even more turmoil in Legacy as a result of that, as new blood comes into the game.
Oh, how do you mean?
I don't know what's ideal, honestly. I don't know, because the monkey paw curls every time I talk about this stuff. But, there was a point in time, let's call it Khan's era, when I got into Legacy. Every time a set came out, I wanted to see more cards that were playable in Legacy. And Khan's was a good example of, there were several great cards for Legacy. You got Treasure Cruise, Fetch Lands came out, were reprinted and stuff, and that was all good. But for the most part, if you look at our past set reviews, we have 20, 30, 40 cards on our set reviews. That was not always the case. You got 10, 15, sometimes only 5 cards in a set review that was like, oh, these cards could be Legacy playable. And so I think, do we want cards, when I say the monkey paw curls, do we want more cards or less cards to be playable in Legacy ultimately? I don't know. But what I do know is that there's good design and bad design, right? And I would consider cards like the One Ring is probably not great design, but it's passable. Whereas Beanstalk is probably bad card design. That's giving you're getting every part of the buffalo for free. There's no build around for that. You don't even have to be playing green. There's no, you could just splash green so that you can play that card, and I think if we look at TK's deck, what were the green cards in that deck aside from Beanstalk? Were there, let's find out real fast.
So I think I can sort of sum up what you're saying in a tighter soundbite. Mm-hmm. That let me know if this is where you're going for on it, because what I hear when you're saying that, and where I think too is, if we ever got any of the designers in on the cast post their NDAs or whatever are lifted, the one thing that I would want to ask them, and if similar, if we ever go back to a Magic Con and get to ask the designers on stage when they do their Q&As like we did this past year, is what is the rationale for having to pay off somebody for playing the card immediately? So the one thing that I've noticed is that the difference between the era that you're talking about, which is, we all have this fond rose-tinted view of past eras.
I'm not saying that was a good era. I'm just saying that was my intro.
I'm saying whether or not we can accurately remember them or not doesn't matter in the moment.
Sure.
What I'm suggesting is that the card designs now that make it because they pay you off immediately, regardless of anything else happening. So, and this came up to mind recently when they were talking about the new spoilers for Ravnica Remastered, and they're reprinting Dark Confidant with new art. And if you saw the post on Twitter where they shared it,
I don't know.
There were younger players that are on Twitter that were following the stuff that didn't play during the era where we played when Dark Confidant was a playable card.
Yeah.
And comments underneath it were like, why doesn't this card do the effect on ETB also?
Yeah. It's also funny, Phil, is that card asks the same of Beanstalk as far as deck building restrictions, right? You don't want to have a bunch of high casting cost cards in your deck for Dark Confidant. So you are restricted in some manner by playing the card, but it doesn't have the ETB, right? And I think that's all the difference in the world.
So I'm saying, when I was mentioning before how there isn't any room to breathe in the format, it's because every card, the moment that it is played, feels as though it is paying off the person for playing it immediately, which means that there is no time. You have no time. It is already converted, right? Mm-hmm. The only card in the format that I think is left that doesn't convert immediately something is exactly Delver.
Secrets. Yeah.
Right. But that's also the minimum possible investment you could make, right? It's a one drop in blue, and it's backed by Days and all the cheap stuff, and it's part of this, the best shell of the last 30 years. So it's like, okay, I think if you look at any of the cards now, if it didn't give you all of the stuff right up front, Like, if there was some amount of I have to invest at all, and then maybe I can convert, and if I can convert, it's a big deal. But like, imagine that difference, right? The people who are looking at Dark Confidant being reprinted, having never played with the card, and the first thing that they're thinking about is, man, this sucks. It doesn't do anything when it ETBs. Why doesn't it do the effect when it ETBs and then every upkeep thereafter? Now, can you imagine that if Dark Confidant did that on ETB in the era where it was good, it would have been broken.
It would have been banned.
But like,
there was
when
talk
you
of banning it during like modern era, like when modern had to ban Bloodbraid Elf and stuff. They would have banned Dark Confidant in a second during that.
I'm just saying that like the opportunity cost that they put on things, whether it's Omnath drawing a card plus doing everything else, meaning that who cares if it dies or not, whether it's Up the Beanstalk drawing the card immediately instead of doing anything else. Like, when you're designing that card, Up the Beanstalk, it's okay, yeah, you want to draw the card because you want to ensure that players can reasonably hit their land drops so they can actually cast 5-drop spells on time. Now, they didn't test it, for Constructed. They admitted to that. Okay, you missed your shot on goal here. But it's interesting that like the concept is like, okay, we're gonna have this draw a card on ETB instead of, I don't know, ETB Scry 2. So you can find your additional land drop or find the 5-drop that you want to be able to cast later. But like, the difference between that is so massive in terms of how much it lets the game breathe. Because that's like the one thing, like every time I've played recently, whether it was at EW, SCG Pit before that, like all of the events, every time I sit down to play, it feels as though I'm holding my breath until the game ends. There's just never a second.
And you can.
Right. But like that's the one area where it's like, I get that like they're designing for Arena and they're designing for Commander, and so they have to have like, they want to be able to pay off players for being able to do the thing, because the last thing they want is for a new player to come in and they try their game and then you have to wait a turn for your thing to do something and then you're bored and so you leave, right? You want to be like, all the stuff's got to do all the stuff all the time. And I wonder if that has what the actual, like, this is my interpretation of what that must be like, where they're going, we need to ensure that players stick around. And in order to do that, we have to stimulate them. And in order to stimulate them, they can never not have anything to do. So cards coming in all have to be able to generate some amount of cardboard so you can do other things with them, or they have to have some kind of value to be playable. That way that like you always have things to do. And that's how it reads to me. But I'm not a designer. So I would love to learn on their end where they're going, we think that all these cards need to have these ETBs and do something immediately because blank. So, and see if it actually lines up with my understanding.
So 2 things. There are 9 cards in TK's deck. 5 of them are in the sideboard. 4 of them are in the main deck that are green. So, like I said, there's no...
I'll guess off the top of my head. Veil of Summer's in the sideboard.
Nope.
Carpet of Flowers is in the sideboard.
Yeah. Two, sorry, there are 11.
Obviously, Up the Beanstalk is in the main board.
Yep.
And that's it.
Deed and Leovold.
Oh, Deed. Yeah. Deed and Leovold. Right.
Yeah. But, okay, so to your point about players getting bored and stuff like that, Rosewater a long time ago wrote this article, which is like, it's such a kick in the mouth to like anyone who would read it, because who reads Magic design articles, Phil? People interested in card design and people who play Magic. It is a Venn diagram of literally like this amount of people. So literally enfranchised Magic players, right? Can we agree on that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, enfranchised Magic players read this man's blog. That's the only people that read this man's blog. So this article was basically saying, as a game designer, F your enfranchised players, only work to get new players. Because enfranchised players are there. They're stuck. They don't have any choice. What are you going to do? Stop playing Magic? In so many words, But that 100% goes with what you were saying, is that enfranchised players will accept these Up the Beanstalk mistakes, whatever. I'm going to, but getting somebody interested in your game is a little harder nowadays. Phil, there are a lot more games to play in 2024 than there were in 1993. I don't know if you know this or not.
So I think the thing that I struggle to reconcile with that, which is why I would love to talk to like the designers that were actually there in the room, is if they're like, okay, if you look at a card like Up the Beanstalk as, a quintessential problem child in this space, right? Like, it pays you off immediately. It is a snowball effect that isn't mana gated. It warps everything. Like, it warped an entire format to the point where it got banned, and now it's also a pillar of legacy. And there are a bunch of cards that are playable solely because Beanstalk exists.
Yeah.
Right? Like, when Leyline Binding, everybody loves making the joke. Leyline Binding, it was a joke at the beginning of the year when they, clearly didn't know what was going on in the format and mentioned it. And then Up the Beanstalk comes out, and now Leyline Binding is a 4-up that's just an EW.
Yeah.
Right? But, like, it's not like Leyline Binding suddenly got good. It's because Up the Beanstalk was a mistake.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the difference, though, that, when he's saying, if you make mistakes or whatever, I think there's a difference between you taking a shot on goal that you knew you were taking a shot, right? But, like, if you admit to not testing Up the Beanstalk in Constructed, what that means is you didn't put a shot on goal. You stumbled and accidentally it went over the goalkeeper's head and happened to bounce around and go behind the line.
Phil, I would love to see what we said about Up the Beanstalk when we reviewed it, because we definitely called it out. I remember putting it up there and being like, this could be a card.
You want to know? I remember it, and I was like, I remember thinking that it wasn't going to be good enough. I was definitely not a believer, but I was not a believer because I did not think that people would just be like, oh yeah, let's just throw in Triomes,
yeah,
and it just won't matter. But the thing that I didn't think to was like, oh, what it actually is going to do is effectively condense the control decks to become closer to Delver than we think, because now they are Murktide plus decks, and instead of Days Wasteland, they're just Leyline Binding Up the Beanstalk. And so, like, instead of limiting the opponent's resources with Days and Wasteland and compressing them, they're just like, whatever, I can just spew all of my resources because I'll never run out of them, right? But
just a bigger cage. It's just a bigger cage.
But the payoff is the same. The payoff is the same. The payoff is still Murktide, right? Murktide becomes the gainer in both spaces because it fulfills the +5 mana requirement, but really is 2 mana.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we've summarized a good amount of what the year, how the year started, how the year ended, right?
Zach, I'm going to contend you there because I don't think we've summarized anything at all. I think we're wells away from that. But what I think this year did do beyond beyond the nightmare addition to the format that is Initiative, and the compounding of EI getting banned and then Delver remaining on top, as with all of the other previous. So, history repeating itself. The addition of black cards to the format. I am curious for 2024 to see if Orcish Bowmasters can hold its rank in 50% of decks. I'll be curious to see what additional one-drop tutors or valuable one-drop tutors Urza Saga gets.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be curious as to how much more powerful Ancient Tomb becomes with additional Commander product releases.
I wholeheartly agree with all of those wonders.
And now, in the same way that we've always had to think about, like we've mentioned previously, where it's like, okay, every single one-drop artifact that you look at, you have to now look through the lens of Urza Saga, right? So every one-drop artifact, 1 or 0 mana artifact, is inherently more powerful because of the context of Urza Saga, right?
Yes.
Similarly, every single card that may or may not have a mana reduction that costs 5 or more, you have to look at it through the lens of if their text box also said draw a card.
Yeah.
And that is going to change how we look at set reviews. Because now, when we look at a 5-drop, if they're like, this card costs 2 less if you blah, 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 would we go, okay, would we pay 3 mana for this if it also drew a card? Because that's the lens that we're going to have to look at it through, because that's the lens, that's the context in which it exists. So when Karlov Manor comes out, it'll be an interesting set design for us to now look at, okay, the pillars of the format, make it so that all of these other cards in context, because the best cards by themselves do stuff with other stuff.
Yeah. Phil, one last question for you. You have to pick one of the clue characters that's going to be playable in Legacy. Who do you choose?
Bro, I'm already trying to look at Alquist fucking Prophetophilis or whatever his name is.
No, I'm talking about like Colonel Mustard. They're making a clue version.
Oh, yeah, I saw those.
So
they're already spoiled, dude. You want to look at them?
Are they?
Yeah, dude, they're spoiled.
Damn it. I say Professor Plum.
We're gonna close this episode by looking at the clue spoilers and assessing them right now.
All right, let's do it. I'm gonna go right to the source here. Murder's a clue, but it says clue first look, right? So you got Senator Peacock. Senator Peacock is a 3/4 for 3 and 2 blue legendary creature, human advisor. Artifacts you control are clues in addition to their other types and have the clue ability, sacrifice to draw a card by paying 2. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, target creature can't be blocked this turn. Okay. Colonel Mustard. Commander Mustard, I should say. He's got.
Yeah, hold on. Send me this link so I'm looking at this. I've seen all these, but send me the link so I'm looking at the same stuff.
Looking right here. Coming in hot. Boom. So Commander Mustard is a 5/5 with vigilance for 3, a red, and a white, and it is a human soldier. Other soldiers you control have vigilance, trample, and haste. I don't like that. And then you can pay 2, a red and a blue, a red and a white, sorry. Until in turn, soldiers you control gain whenever this creature attacks, it deals 1 damage to defending player. Okay, so it gets like the Hell Rider text. After that, I don't see any. Oh, so we got the Master Sleuth. Okay, so we've only gotten 2 of the actual clue characters.
Hold on, I remember them being revealed because I remember looking at them. None of them seem playable, but I also missed on every other card this year. So
yeah, but those are the. I mean, at least according to Scryfall, as of today, those are the only 2 actual characters. There's the lead pipe too. What do you think the most playable? Let's not worry about what these cards read as right now, Phil. What do you think the most playable room, weapon, and character from Clue will be?
My guess is whichever one is best with Ancient Tomb. And then in terms of the best room, it'll be whichever one makes your stuff uncounterable.
How about it's just like the, what is it, the not the laboratory, the garden or whatever. What the fuck? Damn it! What are those things called? There's like the observatory or something like that. But they're just legendary dual lands.
Oh, you think they're just going to make legendary duels?
Could you imagine they make legendary dual lands, but it's a Universes Beyond product? It's just infinitely pissing off like so mmany people.
Dude, I don't know. I mean, that's the way. If you want people to buy product, right?
Yeah,
that's how you're going to do it.
It was Colonel Mustard with the lead pipe in the basement or whatever. in the foyer. And the foyer is a legendary Badlands.
Dude, I mean, I think like if we don't get, I mean, I guess rooms are just going to be lands, right? But like, I guess you could have a like land room.
Yeah, and apparently they've already made them. The dining room is a Gruul enters the battlefield tapped that you can tap for it and investigates. So there goes that. As far as a fun thing that they could have done to just really just rage out the Grognors.
I mean, hey man, I'll take whatever I can get to keep up in this metagame where, you know, I'm totally lost. So
yeah,
if we can get some new action that can, you know, breathe some life that isn't just powering up the same 20 cards, that'd be sweet.
Yeah, it would be cool to just see like, could they ever make it so that like clue tokens are relevant? I feel like they're gonna try.
Dude, I look at cards. So of the new spoilers already for Karlov Manor, they're like, you know, their lead legendary character is just Magus of the Sphinx's Revelation, and it's exactly the kind of shit that I would love to play if it didn't have all of the stats that just line up exactly against never getting to do it in Legacy.
Oh yeah.
So
like, first off, it costs 3 mana, get dazed. Then it's a 3/3, get bolted.
Right. And then the
draws
ETB
cards, get orked.
So yeah, it's 1 white blue for a 3/3 with vigilance, and it's Alquist Proft. When it enters the battlefield, you investigate, which means that you have to pay mana to draw your card. And then you can pay even more mana and sack a clue by paying Sphinx's Rev mana, and then you draw. You just Sphinx's Rev by sacking a clue.
And then your opponent's like, hold on, I'm going to flash in Orcish Bowmasters. Well, on the bright side, all they get is a giant guy because you gain life when you draw cards, so that at least you're not getting killed.
Yeah, I guess that is true. You offset one of the 12 things that Orcish Bowmaster does.
Yeah.
But it's so
drew all sorts of plowshares in those 5 cards you drew,
dude.
Because you got 8 mana in this format somehow.
I don't know where they how you actually determine where in a set you're gonna put your 3 drops versus your 2 drops versus your 4 drops, and how you're gonna line up the numbers and whatnot.
They don't either.
If Alquist Proft was just blue-white for a bear that had the same abilities, then we're talking, right? Now we can actually start thinking maybe there's some interesting space here. Yeah. But it's even in Modern, this card would be so sweet. But the thing is that for 3 mana, you can also put 10 power of rhinos into play.
You can cast Saheeli Rai and do the Splinter Twin thing with Feldar Guardian.
Also, it's in 2 colors, and you could just play the One Ring, and the One Ring draws cards better than this does because it doesn't require any mana. And yeah, so there's so many things where it's this card is so cool, and it'll never see the light of day.
I just want to be able to be I'll never play Rakdos, Patron of Chaos for 6 mana, but I just want to put into play and trigger people by being Rakdos, Patron of Chaos.
Yeah, you just gotta throw them totally off. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this is probably our second to last episode for the year. Maybe we might have 1 or 2 more episodes in the holster, but I wanted to thank everybody for watching. Again, if you can support us, go to patreon.com/Eternal Durdles. We're going to put all that money towards making the podcast better. And
hopefully launch a site, man. Let's
make this community a website, right? And then finally, hey, have a good holiday, a great new year, and take care of yourselves, everyone. Thanks for watching. For the gift that keeps on giving all year round, join our Patreon at patreon.com/Eternal Durdles. And hey, check out this playlist we got up here with all of our interviews over the last couple of years. Some great people from the Legacy community, some really great guests.